Second federal shooting in Minneapolis. What really happened and what it means for our communities. Minneapolis is once again at the center of a national crisis, and this time the country cannot ignore what is unfolding. On Saturday morning, January 24, 2026, federal law enforcement agents, including officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) and related agencies, were involved in a deadly shooting in South Minneapolis. This incident came just weeks after the controversial killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent and has reignited deep public anger, political conflict, and urgent questions about the use of force by federal authorities in American cities. This article explains what is confirmed, what is still unknown, why this matters, and what this means for everyday people who care about justice, accountability, and human dignity. Confirmed facts. What happened on January 24? The incident occurred near the intersection of West 26th Street and Nicollet Avenue South, close to the well-known local landmark Glam Doll Donuts in Minneapolis. According to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, federal officers shot and killed a person during an ongoing immigration enforcement action. Video shared on social media and reported by multiple news outlets shows federal agents struggling with a man on the ground before at least one agent drew a firearm and multiple shots were fired. Minnesota officials confirmed that the victim died at the scene or shortly after, although full official details, including the victim's identity, had not been released at the time of reporting. Federal authorities later stated that a firearm and 2 magazines were recovered at the scene, and they characterized the shooting as a response to a potentially armed individual. Immediate context. A surge in federal enforcement. This incident did not happen in isolation. It took place amid an intensified federal immigration enforcement campaign in Minnesota known as Operation Metro Surge, described by the Department of Homeland Security as one of the largest immigration enforcement operations ever carried out in the state. This operation had already seen multiple violent encounters between federal agents and civilians. On January 7, 2026, an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident and U.S. citizen, during an enforcement action that sparked outrage and massive protests. Less than 2 weeks later, on January 14, a Venezuelan man was shot in the leg by an ICE agent after a confrontation in North Minneapolis. The January 24 shooting represents at least the 3rd incident involving shots fired by federal agents in Minneapolis in a short span of time, deepening the sense of crisis. Why people are outraged. Breakdown. There are several reasons why this latest shooting has triggered intense reactions from city officials, from community leaders, and from residents across Minnesota and beyond. 1. It follows so closely after a controversial killing. The killing of Renee Good earlier this month was already a flashpoint. Good was shot by an ICE agent during enforcement activity, and many local leaders challenged the federal narrative that she posed a threat. The Minnesota mayor called the federal justification garbage and criticized the operation itself. The fact that Minneapolis has now seen multiple shootings involving federal agents just weeks apart has pushed frustration to a breaking point. 2. The use of deadly force raises questions. Federal authorities said a firearm was recovered at the scene of the latest shooting, but the details are not yet independently verified. In high-profile use of force incidents, determining whether deadly force was truly necessary depends on context. Were de-escalation tactics exhausted? Did the individual pose an imminent threat? And was the public in danger? Those are the questions Minnesota officials, civil rights groups, and ordinary citizens expect to see answered transparently. 3. Local leaders are losing confidence in federal tactics. Governor Tim Walz publicly condemned the shooting, calling for the end of the federal operation in Minnesota. Walz said that the continued presence of federal agents and the violent clashes have made the situation sickening and unsustainable. Mayor Jacob Frey, too, criticized the federal role after the earlier killing of Good, saying that federal presence was causing chaos and distrust. When city and state leaders lose faith in how federal agencies carry out enforcement, it reflects a broader breakdown in trust between communities and the government. What federal authorities are saying. Officials from federal law enforcement and the Department of Homeland Security have not fully detailed all aspects of the Minneapolis shooting. Initial comments include: federal agents involved in these operations operate under different rules than local police, often with broader authority for immigration enforcement, but also with more limited oversight mechanisms. DHS reported that a firearm and 2 magazines were recovered at the scene of the January 24 shooting and that the individual was armed, a detail that federal officials cited to justify the use of force. However, independent verification of these claims has not yet been released by neutral investigators, and city officials have called for transparent review and accountability. Public reaction and protest activity. This latest shooting has dramatically escalated local activism. Thousands of residents have already been protesting federal immigration enforcement in Minneapolis, including a major demonstration just a day before the January 24 shooting that featured thousands of people braving cold temperatures and economic boycotts. After the latest incident, protesters gathered again near the scene, clashing at times with federal agents. Reports indicate that federal agents have used tear gas to disperse crowds, further intensifying tensions. These protests are not random acts of anger. They reflect deep, sustained frustration with repeated use of force, lack of accountability, and the impact of heavy federal enforcement in city streets. The bigger picture. Why this is not just about one incident. To understand the gravity of these events, it's important to step back and see the broader pattern. Federal operations in local communities. Operation Metro Surge represents a significant escalation of federal immigration enforcement inside a major U.S. city, far from international borders. Historically, federal immigration agents have focused enforcement near ports of entry or in collaboration with local law enforcement. What is happening in Minneapolis is unusual in its intensity and frequency of armed encounters. Communities expect local law enforcement to handle routine public safety, while federal agencies focus on mandates defined by law. When this balance is disrupted without clear guardrails or transparency, confusion and distrust grow. Recurring use of deadly force. The fact that there have now been multiple shootings involving federal agents in Minneapolis in recent weeks, including at least one fatality, raises urgent questions. What protocols govern when federal agents can use deadly force? Are de-escalation tactics required and consistently applied? How are these incidents investigated, and who has oversight? These are not theoretical questions. When law enforcement uses lethal force, accountability mechanisms must be robust, independent, and transparent. Impact on public trust. Minneapolis has already been a focal point of national conversations around police use of force, community relations, and justice reform. The killing of George Floyd in 2020 sparked worldwide protests and an examination of policing practices. Now, federal immigration enforcement has brought a new set of conflicts to the same streets. When residents see repeated shootings by law enforcement, whether local or federal, without clear accountability, trust erodes. People no longer feel protected, they feel threatened. What comes next? Transparency and Accountability. At this stage, several facts are pending. Independent investigation. Results. Official identification of the victim in the January 24 shooting. Release of body camera or other federal footage. Clarification from DHS on rules of engagement. Input from Minnesota authorities on whether local law enforcement findings align with federal claims. Ordinary citizens have a right to expect transparency when law enforcement uses deadly force, regardless of agency. Accountability is not a political buzzword. It is a foundation of democratic governance. When that collapses, communities lose faith in institutions meant to protect them. What the people are saying. Residents, activists, and local leaders are responding with a mix of grief, outrage, and determination. Protesters are demanding immediate withdrawal of federal agents from Minneapolis, transparent investigations into every use of deadly force, answers about how policy decisions led to repeated armed confrontations, respect for local sovereignty and community safety. These demands reflect deep concern that federal enforcement actions have gone beyond reasonable tactics and into a pattern of unnecessary conflict. Why this matters to every citizen. Whether you live in Minneapolis, another American city, or anywhere in the country, the implications of what is happening reach far beyond a single neighborhood. Use of force standards. The standards governing when law enforcement may use deadly force should be clear, consistent, and rooted in protecting life. When enforcement escalates quickly to lethal encounters, we must ask why. Federal vs. local authority. There must be a balance between federal missions and respect for local governance. Communities should not be treated as battlefields. Community trust. Law enforcement must be trusted by communities if public safety is to be effective. Repeated use of force without accountability undermines that trust. Democratic values. A democracy depends on transparent governance and obedience to the rule of law. When agencies operate without clear oversight, it corrodes the social contract. Conclusion. A moment of truth. The January 24 federal shooting in Minneapolis is far more than a breaking news item. It is a national moment that demands scrutiny, accountability, and decisive action. We have a right to know what happened. We have a right to demand transparent investigations. We have a right to expect that use of force, especially deadly force, is a last resort, not a first response. Communities deserve safety, not fear. Civilians deserve answers, not silence. Democratic systems depend on accountability, not unchecked power. This moment in Minneapolis is a test of our values. How we respond, as a society, as citizens, and as human beings, will shape the future of policing, federal enforcement, and community trust across the United States. If you also support democracy and freedom, feel free to join me in this fight. Click follow, click subscribe, and join me. Divided we fall, and together we can knock down mountains. Through unity is the only way we can make a change. Thank you, stay safe, God bless, I love you all. Crowning Thoughts, True Speaker, Copyright 2025 by Santiago D.C. Maria, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution.